welcome to this lecture sponsored by the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new, IWP is an independent graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs. We offer a doctoral program, 7 master's degree programs, including 2 online MAs, and 18 certificates of graduate study. If you are interested in learning more about us, please visit us online at iwp.edu. We'd like to thank all of our supporters who make our IWP events program possible. To support the work of IWP, please visit iwp.edu/donate. Before we begin, if anyone has any question throughout the lecture, please use the Q&A function located at the top of the screen, and we will answer questions at the end of the lecture. Today we will hear from Professor Przemysław Żurawski vel Grajewski in a lecture titled The Smolensk Disaster and Its Political Implications. Our speaker today, Professor Przemysław Żurawski vel Grajewski, is a Polish political scientist, an academic, and an associate professor at the University of Lodz. Furthermore, he's an associate of the European Institute in Łódź, the Center for Political Thought, and a lecturer at the National European Center at the National School of Public Administration. In 2015, Mr. Żurawski vel Grajewski became a member of the National Development Council, appointed by President Andrzej Duda. His main areas of research include international relations and geopolitics. Professor Przemysław Żurawski vel Grajewski, welcome.
Hello to everybody. It's my pleasure and privilege to have such a rare and unique opportunity to address such a large and special audience. And I would like to present to you the lecture, some remarks, in fact, about the international position of Poland of today, but starting with the Smolensk catastrophe that took place 15 years ago. So, of course, I'm aware of the fact that the world has been changed since that event. Yes, it's quite easy to understand that the Europe of 1945 looked in a different way than the Europe of 1960. And the same, 15 years later, the Europe of 2025 and the world of 2025 looks in a different way than the Europe of 2010, when the very catastrophe took place. So what we can investigate today in connection to that tragic event is rather the roots of the present situation that to discuss all the details. Of course, I would like to supply you with some basic details. The catastrophe took place during the visit of the large Polish official delegation headed by the president of the country, Lech Kaczynski, and 96 other people, mainly the prominent members of the Polish political class, including the chief of staffs of the army, the vice speakers of both chambers of the parliament, and other highly positioned officials. So that was a great political shock for the country, and for obvious reasons it influenced the political position of Poland as a state. It's rather sad to admit the fact that that was a clear demonstration of ineffectiveness of the state in the political game vis-à-vis Russia, which should never have been trusted. That was the long Polish historical experience. Please note the fact that Poland, for the first time, had a conflict with Russia in 1492, exactly the year when Christopher Columbus reached American continent, or well, islands, in fact. Yeah. So it's a pretty long history, full of experiences, including 18 wars. No other state in the world fought so many wars against Russia as Poland did so far, 18 wars. So that is a surprise that at that time, Polish delegation went to Russia, to the Smolensk region, it's Western Russia today, to commemorate the anniversary of the Katyn forest massacre, the crime that was committed by Soviet secret political police, NKVD, and the result of the crime was the murdering of more than 22,000 of Polish army officers and policemen who were taken prisoners of war as a result of the combined German-Soviet invasion on Poland in September 1939, and then murdered in the spring 1940. So that was the reason of the visit. The circumstances were much more complicated because at that time we had the political situation in Poland that could be described as the system of cohabitation, like in France, when you have a president from another political camp than the prime minister and the government and the parliamentary majority. That was exactly the situation in Poland. So the problem was that, surprisingly, the government with prime minister used the opportunity to start the game, the political game with Putin, to minimize the level and the prestige of the Polish presidential visit. And finally, the result was as it was. I don't want to go into details, but that was the real problem that split within the country. And I think that's a good starting point to describe the present situation, because the split that, well, it didn't start at that time, but it was made unsurmountable, but that event. And since that time, the Polish political scene is deeply divided. And that division is not just an emotional one or a personal one. That is the division between two political camps with completely different vision of foreign policy, however, quite clear. I mean, the present governmental camp, that means the civic platform, with the same prime minister that used to be the prime minister during the Smolensk catastrophe, Donald Tusk, is strongly oriented and first of all oriented on the European integration, that means European Union, dominated by Germany. I would even say that more and more dominated by Germany. The evolution of the European Union is worth a separate lecture. Nevertheless, as I have said, the politics is the main characteristic of the politics is dynamism. Yeah, it's a movie, it's not a photo. It's changing all the time. So the Union of 2004, when Poland joined the Union, and the Union of 2025 are to the large extent different organizations. This political camp is characteristic with the far-reaching subordination to the European mainstream, which is liberal and leftist, and the opposition, the camp President Lech Kaczynski, who died in the catastrophe, was the emanation of, is the camp of rather conservative political stream in the Polish political scene, strongly oriented on the United States. This is first of all motivated by the security reasons. I mean, the main conclusions that are made by that political camp is or are that being a neighbor of Russia, you have to be prepared for the worst scenarios. President Kaczynski, who visited Tbilisi during Russian invasion and participated in the great rally on the main square of Tbilisi, of the Georgian capital city, when Russian tanks were approaching Tbilisi. He then said that today, I'm quoting, today it's Tbilisi, it's Georgia, next it could be Ukraine, then Baltic states, and then maybe my country, Poland. And today we can say that, yes, that was a kind of a dark but very accurate prophet. I mean, Russia then invaded Ukraine for the first time in 2014, and then in the large scale in 2022. And that description, that prognosis proved to be correct. And taking into consideration the military weakness of Europe, the reasons of which are numerous and long-lasting, and declarations are not able to change reality. That is one of my field of academic investigation, academic researches, and I have heard the European declarations since 1992. Each few years we had a new idea how to build European military power, and never anything concrete has been built. So reality is that whatever the declarations are, the only military structure that really exists is NATO and not the European Union. And NATO exists due to the American military power and American military prestige. And prestige is the core factor of deterrence. And deterrence, to be credible, must be credible not for those who are protected, but those who are deterred. Namely, these are Russians who should believe in American or NATO or Western determination to resist further Russian expansion, and not the peoples threatened by Russian imperialism. So this is why that political division between, roughly speaking, European centristic orientation presented by civic platform and Atlantic orientation presented by law and justice, whatever are the ideological differences, cultural or political, these hard security issues are the most important, especially when you are, like Poland is, the frontline country. I think we should stress it very clearly that we are not eastern flank, we are potential eastern front, because there will not be any serious front in any other region of the European NATO countries. The challenges from the south are quite serious. I mean, the immigration, the Muslim terrorism, but they are not of the military character. only military challenge is from the east, and it's named Russia. So this is why that division is that clear and that important, because it's about the very existence. It's not about this or that interest, but about the very existence of the country. Having said that, I would like to stress the fact that Poland is a very specific country. Of course, each country is specific. But what is the reason why I dare to say that Poland is specially specific? Please remember that Poland is one of the two, the other one is Spain, probably, of the two great power of the former centuries that ceased to be a great power, but the only great power, former great power, that ceased to exist for 123 years. It's impossible for the Frenchman, for the Englishman, for the Spaniard, for a German to imagine that there is no German state, no French state, no Britain, no Spain. Please believe me, we don't need imagination, just good memory. My grandfather was born as a subject of Tsar Nicholas II. My other compatriots, grandfathers, were born as the subject of Habsburgs or Hohenzollerns, because there was no Poland. And then Poland disappeared for 5 years during the Second World War, and then was dominated by the Soviets for the next 45 years. The Soviets, which means Russians, which in Polish political memory means the barbaric invaders from the East. So in that sense, I would like to stress it again, it's not about this or that kind of interests. It's just the game about the very existence. And we share that point of view with other nations in our region. I would like to show you the map or a set of maps that would illustrate the reality in our region. I hope you can see the map of Europe. Poland is in the very middle, geographically speaking, not politically speaking, in the very middle of the continent. Well, there is a kind of funny competition between the nations in the region who is a real center of Europe. We are one of them. Lithuanians would say that they are, Ukrainians that they are, Poles, of course, that the geographical center of Europe is in Poland. It's not a very serious dispute. The problem is that we all share that tragic experience of being Russian neighbors. With whom? Of course, with 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, with Finland, that used to be a part of Russian Empire between 1808 and 1917, like Poland between 1795 and then 1815 up till 1915, when Germans kicked out Russian armies from Polish soil during the First World War, and then again in Russian zone of influence since 1944-45 till 89. And of course with Ukraine and Belarus, to some extent with Romania, and the Caucasian nations, which are a little bit more remote, but there is a kind of mutual understanding, especially with Georgians, that are perceived in Poland as culturally similar, which is not completely true, but it's nice to say. Our part of Europe is organized in the most powerful defensive structure of common defense or collective defense, namely NATO, with, of course, the United States and Canada. And I would like to stress the fact that we joined NATO. Russian narrative is that it was NATO expansion. No, it wasn't. It was not NATO who swallowed Poland or the Baltic states or Romania or other countries in the region. That were our political will and our political efforts and hard work of our diplomacy that resulted in the situation in which the doors to NATO were opened for us by the old members of the alliance. So we were not forced, neither seduced, just having the long-lasting experience of being Russian neighbors. We wisely predicted that unless we are protected by a great military power, we will be in the situation in which Ukraine is today. And this war we are witnessing now is the best proof that that decision to enlarge NATO, to accept our countries in the alliance, was the decision that resulted in the extension of the zone of peace and stability, and that according to the very first task of the alliance that was for the first time proclaimed by the first Secretary General of NATO, Lord Ismay, NATO was created to keep Americans in, Russians out, and Germans down. And that is a perfect goal from the Polish point of view. What are some details that are worth mentioning? First, look at those two maps. I hope they are not too small. Yeah, this is the Europe of between the First and the Second World War, and that's the Europe of today, the ethnic map. Yeah, you can see how much this ethnicity was changed and how much Russians enlarged their area of settlements, which then was lost by the Soviet Union when it collapsed, and resulted to some extent in this kind of psychological thinking that was a characteristic of Weimar Republic of Germany between the wars, namely the country that lost the war. For the Germans, that was the First World War. For the Soviets, Russians, that was the Cold War. But they lost it in a very unconvincing way. This legend of Dolchstoß in Germany, the setback, and the legend of the betrayal of civilians, either that were Social Democrats in Germany or Gorbachev and Shevardnadze in the Soviet Union, namely the situation in which the army has never been clearly defeated. Yeah, it was in fact defeated, but in a very unconvincing way for both, for the Germans in 1918 and for Russians in 1991. And that resulted in a very similar reaction, namely the hope for successful revenge. It was not the scale of humiliation. That is the Russian narrative, yeah, that you should not humiliate great nations, because Germany were humiliated in Versailles, and then they get crazy and created the Third Reich. And there was a disaster of the Second World War. So don't humiliate Russia because the result could be similar. No, it was not humiliation. It was the hope for successful revenge. Germany were much more humiliated in 1945, but with completely different result. So that's the main problem, that Russians are not convinced that they really have no potential to recreate their empire. These are Polish ethnic area, both within Polish political border and some call it memories of the former Polish or Polish-Lithuanian state. I showed it just to stress the fact that there is a potential of provocation. Look, this is the borderland between Lithuania and Belarus, and from the ethnic point of view, that borderland is inhabited by local Polish majority, which can be used by Russians to provoke problems in that area. Then another area of risk are the areas that were robbed by Russia from Estonia, that is Narva region and Petseri, and from Latvia, Abrene. And then what is worth saying, just to describe the territorial reality, this is the map of, well, not exactly historical regions of Ukraine, but look, blue is that Ukraine, that part of today's Ukraine that belonged to Poland between the wars. Brown is that part that belonged to Hungary and then to Czechoslovakia. Beige is that belonged to Romania. Yellow is the area of the Soviet intensive settlement and industrialization of the Stalinist type. So the ethnic map of area was changed to the large extent. And here you have the historical map. Yeah? This is the contemporary border of Ukraine and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So please remember that from the Polish point of view, there is a strong memory that we had a common state with Ukrainians for several hundred years. They were our compatriots. We share the same political culture, and it was a republican culture. I mean, Polish parliament dominated the political life of the country in 1505. Our habeas corpus act is of 1423. Neminem captivabimus nis iure victim. We will not imprison anybody without a proper trial. Yeah, so please, why I'm showing this? To stress that it is not Russia, and Belarus is not Russia. Yeah, this is completely different political culture. We lost that territory step by step for Russia in 17th century, then in 18th century, and just to show you why it's still important. These are the inhabited area of Ukraine in 17th century. And this is the map of voting in 2014. And you can see the Habsburg part of Ukraine, the interwar Polish part of Ukraine, that part of Ukraine that was inhabited by in 17th century, and that part that was settled down under Russian rule. Yeah, you can see the difference in the participation in elections. The borders of 17th century are still seen here as the border of political culture. So this is why that historical dimension of relations in the region are still important. And having that in mind, I would like to stress the basic challenges we have to be met today. First, we have Imperial Russia that is self-confident, that thinks that it is strong enough to recreate the empire, that believes in a pure military power as the only factor decisive in international relations, that has no respect for human life, both foreigners and its own subjects. I deliberately say subjects, not citizens. That's the most common mistake in the West, to perceive Russian government as the government of any other normal country, the first and the most important preoccupation of which is to take care of the well-being of its own people. No, it's not the case in Russia. And Russia submitted two documents to NATO and to the United States on December the 17th, 2021. In those documents, in those memoranda, which in fact were a kind of ultimatum just before a Russian full-scale invasion on Ukraine. Moscow demanded the withdrawal of NATO to the borders of 1997. That means to make Central Europe military impotent against any highly probable future Russian invasion. And this is why my thesis is that the present war in Ukraine is not about territory. So you cannot stop that war making territorial concessions for Russia. Because if Russia is short of something, it's certainly not of territory. It is the largest country in the world. And it's not about few provinces of Ukraine. It's about the international position of Russia. Russia wants to use Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian demographical potential as one of the bricks in the construction of the future Russian Empire, the borders of which should be again in Central Europe. I mean, Baltic states, Finland, Poland, maybe not all of them as the Russian provinces, but at least as Russian vassals. I think Poland is in a different position than the Baltic states. Nevertheless, the method to achieve that goal will be the same, namely war. And this is why we think that we cannot build the protection signing treaties, or we cannot base our security just on international law without baking it with tangible and huge military power. And this is why, however, this strong pro-American orientation was for some time broken in Poland just after the Smolensk catastrophe. For a few years between 2010 and 2015, that was combined with the shift in American policy after George Bush Jr. We had the presidency of Barack Obama with unfamous, from Polish point of view, reset with Russia. That was perceived as a great threat, as naivety, which, by the way, is repeated by all the American presidents, whether it was George Bush Sr., who delivered that the so-called chicken speech in Kyiv in 1991, then George Bush Jr. looked in the eyes of Putin and saw a real Democrat. Then we had reset. Then we had Joe Biden with his two first decisions, the lifting of sanctions that had been imposed on Nord Stream 2, German-Russian construction that is a threat for Central Europe, and then the prolongation of New START, and then the meeting with Putin. All those efforts, whoever made them, always ended with next Russian invasion of that or that country, or the violation of international law. What is going on today is much more dramatic. I mean, that peace plan for Ukraine that was submitted by President Trump administration, in my opinion, is completely unrealistic. I mean, we have the situation in which there is a proposal on the table to freeze the conflict along the front line and to deploy the peacekeeping forces, but those peacekeeping forces should not be composed with American contingent and should not have the legal status of NATO forces. If we take into consideration the experience from Korea, because sometimes people speak about Koreazation of the Ukrainian war, it's completely unjustified analogy. The zone of separation in Korea is 238 kilometers. In Ukraine, you need 980, or if you take the entire border, it's 3,700 kilometers. So you need hundreds of thousands of soldiers, which is completely impossible. Without American prestige, without American power of deterrence, Russia will not be deterrent simply. It's impossible to build the stabilization in the region unless you defeat Russia. It's wishful thinking. You cannot just sign the treaty with Russia and expect that Russia will respect the treaty because of its signature on the document. The problem is how to build up the real military power. And I would like to reassure you that the long Republican tradition of Poland, the fact that we are much older democracy that we are perceived to be, much older than German or French, comparable to English or Scandinavians. We perfectly understand that the governments can do only what the electorate accept to be done, because the burdens, the resources, human, financial, taxpayers' money, can be spent in a strategic scale only when this kind of policy is accepted by the people. So we don't expect miracles. We understand that each nation, each society has its own priorities, its own problems to be solved. And we cannot expect the others to pay our accounts. So the main idea of those two camps who are still in Poland since the Smolensk catastrophe is first either to build up such a structure in a close cooperation with the United States. And after the failure of the reset of Obama, that policy came back to Poland. We had a change of the government in 2015, and Law and Justice government started to be at power again, with the president from the same camp, President Andrzej Duda. And the Polish idea how to respond to that Russian threat was first to consolidate the eastern flank of NATO. And that resulted in the meeting in Bucharest, in the capital city of Romania, of the so-called Bucharest 9. It was 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. And we asked NATO to deploy enhanced military presence in the eastern flank, which was accepted at the NATO summit in 2016 in Warsaw and implemented by spring 2017. And we had American troops. Today it's more than 10,000 American soldiers in Poland. We had the British leaded battalion in Estonia, Canadian battle group, Canadian leaded battle group in Latvia. Polish soldiers served there too. German battalion in Lithuania, and then till 2022 there was a multinational division in Romania. Now it's led by France. Nevertheless, we don't have the homogenic bloc in the eastern NATO front line, because those core countries are Poland, 3 Baltic states, and now as well Finland and Sweden, since they joined NATO. And we still hope for Romania. However, the internal situation in Romania is very complex today due to the confusion related with their presidential elections. So that's the general image, and we have already built that system that is called deterrence by punishment, based on forward presence of small NATO forces, but the forces that belonged to the leading NATO powers like United States, Great Britain, Canada, and Germany, just to deter Russians in that psychological way. While what we really need and what we learned from the Ukrainian war is that we need deterrence by denial. Now we had the system that existed during the Cold War in Western Berlin, where not the power of the Allied troops, but the fact that they were American, British, and French deter Russians, because the political decision to open fire to Western Berlin police is the decision of a different kind than the decision to open fire to Americans, British, and French soldiers. And this kind of protection we have already received. Today, we have Americans in that wire trap position in Poland and other nations in Baltic states. While massive Russian war crimes in Ukraine brought back to our mind the old truth that Russian wars had genocidal character, and we cannot plan our defense with such an assumption that some part of our territory would be temporarily occupied, because then we will be forced to liberate massive graves of our murdered compatriots, which is completely unacceptable. So this is why we have to build the deterrence by denial. But of course, it would be an illusion to expect that, American citizens or British citizens or French or any other country will pay the bulk of the costs to build such a system. That is our task. And this is why Poland is spending so much Polish taxpayers' money to build up, to upgrade our military power. And in comparison to our GDP, Poland is now unquestionable champion in spending, in military spending in NATO, because we treat it seriously. And my message to American citizens is, we are aware of the fact that from the American point of view, we are only one of many areas of American interests. We have to compete in some sense with Middle East, with Far East, with Latin America, other problems. And first, we have to ask ourselves what we can add to the common security and not what we can ask to be given. So what we can add? We can add our manpower. We have a strong military tradition. The Poles are proud of Polish military history, and we are perfectly aware of the fact that capitulation is not the way to save lives. Please remember that Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia capitulated in 1939. And for example, Latvia lost 19% of population in Gulag system and in massive executions by Russians. And what happened in March and April 2022 in Ukraine remind us perfectly well that the nature of the enemy is still the same. We cannot say that take it easy, it's not 1940, it's not 1937, anti-Polish action of NKWD when 119,000 of Poles were executed. No, it still can happen. We can see it in Ukraine. We can see the kidnapped children. That's the practice that is known to the Poles from Nazi German policy. So history is back. and the only answer must be of the military nature, and we are ready to build up our military power. What we need is technology and political support, because Polish potential is not large enough to be an effective counterbalance for Russia. We have to consolidate the region, and the only two large factors of power, demographic power, and therefore military power, is Poland and Ukraine. The other countries are too small. We highly respect heroic efforts of our Baltic allies. We have great respect for high technology and military knowledge of our Scandinavian allies. We will welcome Romanians, the third relatively large country in the region of 19 millions. Poland has 37 millions, Ukraine today probably a little bit less. But without Polish-Ukrainian cooperation, the construction is impossible. While Polish-Ukrainian relations are both historically complicated and now are politically vulnerable. I think it is, unfortunately, the result of the previous American and German policy, namely the administration of Biden was inclined to support the political change of the government in Poland, and it succeeded together with Germans. Ukrainians took part in that operation. We had a set of quarrels in 2023, and now the public mood in Poland is rather bad as far as the present government of Ukraine is concerned. That must be rebuilt for the sake of common interest of Poland and Ukraine. And I think it would be far easier with American support than without it. The same can be said about the possible developments within the European Union. As I have said, it's worth separate lecture, but the present American administration policy towards Russia and Ukraine boost the Franco-German policy of centralization of the European Union under the slogan, Americans are abandoning us and we have to consolidate, which means to give up the principle of unanimity on the common foreign and security policy, which means that France and Germany could overvote us whenever they want, which means that we could be blocked in our policy both towards the United States and towards Russia. And finally, because I would like to leave some time for questions and answers. What is the American business, not just political, but as well economic interest in our region? I would like to point on two things. Let me show you another map again. That is well, I can see it now. I don't know why. Okay, so we have maps. First, what is important is that Poland bought a lot of military equipment and armaments in the United States, and Ukraine received a lot of military equipment from the United States, which means that two largest armies in the region are equipped with American weapon and equipment, which means that other countries in the regions, due to the logic of military logistic, are more and more inclined to do the same, namely to buy American equipment, which I think is good for American military industry. And another issue is that Poland started in 2015 the idea of the free sea cooperation, the cooperation between Baltic Sea, Black Sea, and Adriatic Sea. Now it's 13 countries situated between those seas plus Greece. American Congress adopted a resolution on November the 18th, 2020, in support of that initiative, pointing on Ukraine, Moldavia, and Western Balkans as the partners to the cooperation. If we take all those countries together, we have 180 million of people who are a perfect market for American LNG under one condition, that we kicked out Russian gas that is imported in a common cooperation between Germany and Russia, or used to be by Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, and saturated the region, creating the threat for the stability. North from the Carpathian Mountains, we have already managed to get rid of Russian dependence on energy raw materials. We are completely independent. And the task is for the territory south from the Carpathians. Without American support, due to political reasons, due to the fact that it is competitive to the German interests, it would be far more difficult. So this is why, again, the situation in the region is complicated, and without Americans cannot be solved according to Polish interest. Of course, if Americans support our point of view. If not, we will lose simply. There is no other option. I mean, Americans are indispensable. Without you, there is no other source of power in the region that could give us any chance of the positive scenario. And negative scenario means war, or rather set of wars, because there will be no peace with undefeated Russia. Russia will stop where it will be stopped. It will not stop by itself. And that's my main conclusion, and I am ready for questions and answers.
Thank you, Professor. And now, if anyone have any questions, you can put it into the Q&A section.
I can see one question from Sarah Dwyer, if I can pronounce the name in the correct way. What advice would you give to President Trump's advisors at this time? Well, first, never trust Russia. Please remember that Russia knows only two kinds of the foreign states, the enemies and the vassals, and you can choose. To build up stabilization in the region and to reduce the burdens that are now on American shoulders, you have to support those nations in Central Europe that are ready to accept their part of the burden, which means, first of all, Poland and Ukraine as the largest one, then Baltic states and Scandinavians as the most devoted and convinced. I mean, they have no doubts about the real nature of Russia. If we receive that support, we can take the burdens out of American shoulders, which I think is one of the main goals of President Trump, which is quite natural. Yeah? But don't have the illusions that you will find the modus vivendi with undefeated Russia, any gesture that is perceived in Washington as a goodwill gesture of compromise will be interpreted in the Kremlin as the sign of weakness and exploited mercilessly. This is the kind of the country. And another important observation, don't have any illusions, any hopes about any possibility to build democracy in Russia, not in the few generations to come. Russian province has criminal character. No higher idea will be born there. If you have any scenario to be prepared for, it's rather the scenario of post-revolutionary China of 1911. That means the criminal wars of warlords, who is in the best position to take spoils of compatriots in a given province. No higher idea will be born there.
We have more questions. The next one is from Ms. Świętorzecka. How can you see Canada's role in NATO?
Well, it's a very interesting question from Polish point of view, because please remember that Canada, due to internal situation, namely due to the fact that about 2 million of Canadian citizens have Ukrainian roots, is for electoral reasons linked to the situation in our region, and is for that reason a stable supporter of Ukraine. And Poles and Canadians serve together in Latvia, which create another link between our two countries. So I think that, of course, Canada is not the great power. Nevertheless, it's a serious country. I mean, I would advise not to underestimate prestige, and the prestige of Canada, of United States, of Great Britain, of Australia, of that English-speaking world, in the eyes of Russians, is quite high. That means that the military presence of the troops from those countries makes much more credible deterrence than from the other countries. And I think that the Canadian role is to maintain that prestige, to demonstrate the determination, and to keep forever that image of hard Canadians that are serious about military security issues. And that is something that we appreciate very much.
We have time for 2 last questions, and the next one is from Mr. James Gilmore. What is your assessment of the Trump-Witkov friendly approach to Putin and Russia?
Well, that's a great problem in Poland, because it's weakening pro-American camp in Poland. It's more and more difficult to defend that political line that is based on the orientation on Washington. And it helps Germans and French to promote the Brussels orientation, which in fact leads to the same kind of catastrophe, but in another way, namely to the Franco-German domination that will end with a kind of reconciliation with Russia. And usually people look at that Trump-Witkov maneuvers around Russia only in that Eastern dimension, which is obvious. I mean, the way in which Witkov was speaking about Putin was just pathetic, simply from the Polish point of view. You can not have this image of the KGB colonel who was trained to manipulate people and to kill them. And we should be fully aware of the nature of that man when we can hear this kind of naive opinions as were presented by Witkov. Of course, we feel, diplomatically speaking, very uneasy. But there is another dimension of that situation. I mean, this kind of narrative produce credibility, which is untrue credibility, which is not real, just imaginary, that having this kind of American policy towards Russia, we can make a reasonable choice and switch to base our security system on the European Union. But European Union is a military vacuum, and nothing will be done except for declarations. So it has a double negative impact, not only on the Western direction of our policy, but as well on the Eastern dimension, but as well on the Western dimension, because of that seducing power that is added by that rhetorics to Franco-German narrative, which is misleading.
And the last question from Ms. Katerina Yushchenko. Given that Russia will actively interfere in European elections in upcoming years, what do you foresee for the future of the EU? Will it remain united, or will they be divided?
European Union never was united. And please remember that it was France and Germany who wanted to invite Putin to the EU summit in June 2021. And unless Polish, Baltic states, Scandinavian, and the Netherlands and Romanian veto, they would have invited him. Yeah? That was the German policy of 4 common spaces, the German policy with Russia, including security common space. France launched its last satellites using Russian Roscosmos rockets on February the 10th, 2022, 2 weeks before full-scale Russian invasion. And we still have it in our memory. Now we have that problem with Russian gas, namely Germany, Austria, Slovakia, and Hungary want to start again the debate about the come back to the importation of Russian gas. So please remember that the priority of Italy, of Spain, of France is North Africa and the problem of immigration and terrorism, not Russia. So don't have this kind of illusion. The problem with Ukraine, from the Polish point of view, in Polish-Ukrainian relations, is that the overwhelming part of Ukrainian expert debate about foreign policy, including European politics, is based on German money and German think tanks. It's Adenauer Foundation, Bertelsmann Foundation, Ebert Stiftung Foundation, and Soros Foundation of Widrodzenie. I can speak Ukrainian, I can follow it, and I can see to what an extent you are misled. Yeah? And my advice to Ukrainians is look at the reality with your own eyes, not with Polish, not with German, not with any foreign eyes, with your own eyes. And that would help us a lot for our mutual understanding too. And yes, there is Russian interference in the elections, but there is German interference in the elections too, in Romania, in Poland. So the situation is much more complicated than it is spoken about.
Professor, I would like to thank you so much for this insightful lecture and all of you who joined us today. For those interested in learning more about our courses and applying to study at IWP, please visit us online at iwp.edu. Lastly, we hope you will all save the date for IWP's 35th anniversary gala on Thursday, October 9th at the National Portrait Gallery. Tickets and sponsorship options are now available on our website at iwp.edu/gala. We hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.